Aloha and welcome to Issues That Matter. I'm Lynette Cruz. I'm your host today. Auspicious day. We have some awesome guests here. I'm actually going to let them introduce themselves because they do it better than I do. And also a really interesting topic. We're going to be talking about the Maui sand dunes and burials, something that I think Oahu people know very little about. So welcome this opportunity to actually share more, and I want to hear myself. To my right, Claire Pana, introduce yourself.
Hi, Claire Pana from Wailuku, Maui. I actually was born in the sand hills of Maui, and this is the area we're talking about. The sand hills actually, if you see on the map, extend all the way down from the ocean at Wai'ehu, all the way up, past Wailuku, past Kahului, into northern Kihei, all the way around to Ma'alaya and back. So it's quite a large area, but the area that we're talking about today is really about in a small vicinity of near where I live. And I grew up in these sand dunes, and we played in the sand dunes, and it's different, you know. We run up and down the sand, and sometimes we have seen bones fall out of the sand, and we're very respectful. There are places not to go, that we're told not to go, and then there are places where we can go, and we're really, I feel like I was born in the sand, and I am of the sand. And when in 2005 I was kind of given an invitation to come and do something about all that was happening in my neighborhood, and that was they were building a shopping center for Safeway in that was maybe about a half block away from my house. And this is the first time I've ever looked at anything about any kind of development. And when I read through it, I was taken aback because there were then 5 burials that were already on the property that had just had the trees cleared. And as it went along, I found out that there were actually 21 burials on a 12-acre lot, and they were going to put a shopping center on it. And I said, how could you possibly do that? And in my journeys with this, advocating for the respectful treatment of the iwi kupuna there, I learned that it's very hard to get any state agencies, county agencies, planning departments, state historic preservation to do anything in the way of better preservation, more respectful treatment. It was totally a time of feeling totally unempowered and unable to speak for the iwi kupuna who were asking me to come and do something. And so as it went along, I had to listen to the sand mining of this beautiful lot. It was 12 acres, and I don't know how much sand they took out of it, but it went down 40 feet the first time, and then probably another 60 feet. So I would say they took out at least 100 feet of sand out of this lot, and I got to listen to the bulldozers, the trucks, the loaders, all going during the day, because it came right into my window, and then it would stop, and I knew that they found another burial. All told, what was reported from the archaeologist was 21 burials when we started, and 12 more burials that were underneath, 11 that were underneath the Safeway store, the footprint of that store, and 1 more burial that was in another building. And so I felt quite powerless to stop it and to have any impact at all. And even when I was able to get a mitigation in the Planning Commission, as I asked the authorities to enforce the condition, which was, they said that they would be limited to going 6 inches at a time as they graded and prepared the land for the shopping center. And every agency that I asked and told them they were in violation did absolutely nothing and told me it was all right. And so I pretty literally gave up after making myself sick. And then, but come this year, 2017, the issue came up again, and there it came out with a grading permit in which they were allowed to take 200,000 plus cubic yards of sand out of a lot with a grading permit. And this led us to calling the county on their permitting process, calling the zoning commission or the zoning part of the planning commission to enforce against Maui Lani Partners, who is the landowner, to get them to stop the grading, to stop the sand mining where they had already found significant amounts of burials on this one TMK. And when we could not get the county to take that permit back that was obviously illegal, and we couldn't get the planning department to issue a real violation, we knew that we needed to do something more, and we asked Mr. Lance Collins, what can we do? And he was so kind to look at the case for us and actually found a way that we could advocate and stop the sand mining. And there the story begins in the current day. Thank you.
That was the longest introduction.
I'm sorry.
But that's okay, it's cool.
Okay.
Lance, tell us who you are and how you got involved.
Sure. My name is Lance Collins. I practice law on Maui, and I'm from Maui. I grew up on the northwest side, the west side of the dune in Kahului, Dream City, and I went to school on the east side of the dune at St. Anthony's School, Puali Nani's Windblown Sands, as it's sometimes called. This particular area of the sand dunes, I think maybe people who are not so familiar with Maui, it's now called Maui Lani. There's a 2,000-acre area of the sand dunes that's been designated as a special project district for development. And it's a very small portion of this larger sand dune complex. And so almost immediately when I started practicing law, I got drawn into issues related to the Maui Lani development. And it was through that that Claire and I connected. And it's not so much of a choice, but more of a calling. And if you don't listen or you don't want to hear, it will happen anyways. So I'm involved in this case. I want to be, of course, and also that I think that there's a strong calling to be involved with it as well. That's not quite choosing.
That's awesome. Thank you very much. Kaniloa.
Aloha. My name is Kanilo Kamaunu. I come from also Maui. I come from the area called Waihe'e in Waihe'e Valley. And of course, you know, when we got involved with the sand dunes, I kind of took a measurement of how long the sand dune was. So if you take it from my area, where it begins at Waihe'e, and you go all the way out to Ma'alaia, it's about 12 miles long. The width is about almost 7 miles wide. You know, so it was a significant part of Maui. In fact, people don't know that it's the only feature of its kind is found on Maui. There is not another feature such as the sand dunes on any of the other islands. And of course, in this area, you know, from that point of view, burials are throughout and have been documented for many years even historically, prior to the state of Hawaii, have been recorded of iwi or bones of our ancestors throughout the dunes. And it's been well recorded, well documented, not only by Hawaiian scholars, but also from foreigners who came to do surveying in there. So it is well documented. And the reason I'm involved is because, as was stated to me, the kupuna brought me, or my ancestors connected me to this case, to my genealogy. And so, as Lance was saying, we all were saying, we heard the call, and maybe from different points of view, but yet the same concern is about our people, our history. And we're not only talking about Kanaka, but we're talking about others as time went by. So, you know, it should be a concern of the whole community, not just on Maui, but all of the islands, because we are having this issue everywhere.
Earlier when we talked, Claire had mentioned the fact that she asked you to help early on, and that you kind of wondered what any of that had to do with you. Do you want to share that story a little bit? You share it.
Oh, sure. Okay. When I started doing this, I have not been able to connect fully to my genealogy. Was told that I could not claim as a descendant to the burials. And so I frantically looked for someone who could claim the burials and speak for them, and so that they would be treated better. And I looked at Connie and said, "You have to be related to them. Aren't you related to them?" And they actually thought I was crazy. And so Connie, after a while, after I think 3 years, went to the Bureau of went to the archives, was doing some research, and lo and behold, he was actually related right into that particular ili in Maui. There are only 7 allodial titles, and his ancestor had 8 lo'ikalo in that area. So
Tell us some more about that.
So yeah, my sister and I had come to Oahu to do some discoveries on the for our ancestors' genealogy, and it led us to the archives. And you know, of course, Claire was kind of badgering me about my relationship.
She can badger.
Yeah, you know, she's very tenacious and very strong-headed. And even though I refuted that I really had no connections, because you know we're thinking small. We're thinking that I'm from Waihe, and that's where everything stops. Well, lo and behold, we go to the archives. We pull up this 2-sentence testimony from Kekahuna, who happens to be in my lineage, and he states that he has 8 lo'i or kalo in the area of Oahu. And the only time I heard that name was mentioned by Claire and another friend of ours that were doing the study, the work, the history of the area. And if you know Maui itself, that's right in Wailuku. It's along Kahumanu Highway, right across from the famous Bowdoin High School of Maui, where some of us graduated from. But it's right in that area where they built the new shopping center. And I mean, what are the chances of someone telling you, you must be related? And then you go ahead 2 years later, do the research, and you find a connection. And not only find a connection, but to the area of what the whole dispute is about, that is not by chance.
Too specific.
Yeah, it's just too right on. So, you know, I felt that the kupuna was calling, so.
More, share more. And actually, I wanted you to also share, Lance, about your connection, because genealogy here, she lived there, you know, and probably genealogical connection for you as well, but unknown as of this moment. Mm-hmm. But here you are. Why are you?
Right. So I don't have a genealogical connection to the land and to the people that lived there. The first case that I was involved with this area had to do with the mayor, who's now the mayor again. He had exempted some land developers from having to comply with the height restriction. And I didn't want to be involved in the case the first time, and I ended up being involved in the case. There were a bunch of working class families in Kahului that used to have a sort of flood control ravine behind their house, and it turned into a 30-foot wall of mill mud, toxic mill mud, that houses were then going to be built on top of. And anyways, I didn't want to be involved. I was very busy, but I ended up representing the first group of people who sued the county and the developer. And it was, and then that case resolved, and then I thought, oh, no more. Then the rest of the neighborhood decided they were going to sue, and I wasn't originally involved, but then I ended up getting volunteered back in. And it was actually through that I came to know Claire, through one of my clients, put us in connection with each other. And so that was going on for a while. And then with the Safeway development, Claire and I actually made contact. And it was another one where I don't know if Claire remembers, but I was, again, resisting. I was trying to figure out ways to help her without getting directly involved. And again, it doesn't matter if you are listening or you hear what's being done, but
Somebody's actually calling you too.
if you're called to do it, you got to do it. So that's especially in this area. That's been the case.
A couple of other things we talked about prior to this taping. You mentioned this kind of government support by waiving restrictions for development, and then what happens as a result of that. For example, I never heard of what you were talking about, those other families that you first represented, and what happened behind their house. I never heard that. What is that?
Well, it's another thing that's never probably going to end. Arakawa, against the advice of his people, granted a waiver of the zoning laws and basically allowed developers behind Claire's house, and actually Claire's house, it's even more egregious because in some instances they buried a 80-foot ravine, right? I mean, the houses that are now behind her house, some of them are on at least 80 feet of fill. And the ones in Kahului that I first got involved with, it's more like 30 feet and it's toxic mill mud. And basically the rule is you can build from 30 feet, natural or finished grade, whichever is lower. And he waived it so that they could just build 30 feet from wherever they finished putting in dirt. But that case is sort of the opposite of this one, because in that one they're adding fill. But in all of these other cases, it's where sand is being extracted out of the sand dune. And the problem is that there's two types of burials that are, I mean, it's also the only sand dune complex, as Connie Lois was saying. And so even just from that perspective, it's significant natural resources in themselves. But in addition, they also contain two types of burials, the more traditional types of burials, and then also the area that's in dispute is where the Battle of Kakanilua occurred. And so all of the warriors that were slaughtered there it was not permitted for them to be given a burial or for their bodies to be treated. They were supposed to be left out with their bones being exposed. And so the upper areas of sand in the dunes are burials themselves. It's not, and so that's, I think in in this issue, that's the concern has to do with the treatment of those burials, and then also the more
Sand.
common traditional burials. That it's the sand itself is is a burial. Is the remains of the kupuna that were put there. And it's not, as Connie Loa said, it's not something that was just made up yesterday so that we could torture the landowner. Even Lauren Thurston, in one of his travel logs, right? He even says, he talks about this area and he says, there's bones everywhere, partially exposed. So it wasn't like, it wasn't like this big conspiracy of Hawaiians trying to find some way to give, a landowner a hard time. This area is for decades has been written about by archaeologists, and they all say this area was a cemetery for hundreds of years, and this is also where the Battle of Kakanilua occurred, and all of the bodies that are associated, burials that are associated with that. So
I think we have testified so many times in various places, we say, how dare the council, the developers, the planning department, how dare they say it's okay to go and plow through our burials, desecrate them, and sell the sand? And how dare they do that? What right do they have to say that and do that to our burials?
I think if you put into perspective, as we're talking about, especially what Lance related as when that battle of Kakanilua, which is 1776, and it's between brother-in-laws, in fact. Kalaniʻopuʻu, who was married, who is the ali'i nui, actually, of the Big Island. He is married to the sister of Maui's ali'i, which is Kahikili. And so he comes to battle, he's going to take over Maui. And as he's traveling with his armada, as I believe the description is in one of the histories given of canoes, he's traveling, from Hanasai coming up, and he's actually battling all the way through. And then he comes into what is now known as Ma'alaya, and he stages there. And their warriors actually come through that isthmus. They're coming through where the dunes. And the significant part about it is the dunes play a very big part. Kalaniʻopuʻu was told by his advisor that this is not a good time to go and fight, and he shouldn't. He dismissed that warning, and he comes to fight anyway against his brother-in-law. Kaikili, his advisor, told him, well, lead them in as with the fish to the sluice. And when they come in to the area, you close the gate behind them. So what he's saying is that you have the advantage because he's going to have to come into the sand dunes, and the sand dunes is your defense. And when you read the account, it's not just a short battle. It's these guys are battling all day, and the two regiments that come with them, which make up about 1,600 Nakua, are the elite, the PPE and the Olapa. So you're not just talking about and others that came to fight. And as they describe the battle, both sides take heavy losses. The first day, Kalaniʻopuʻu's warriors are advancing. And when you listen to the account, it says uphill. The battle is done uphill all day, and they fight through the whole day uphill. So, it becomes a significant part of our history because now, you look at it, where is that? Where is that account? How are we supposed to teach our kiki, our mopuna, of that history is so evident and so, it gives a context of how important a place is, and you lose that. But then these guys all lose their lives, because they pretty much slaughter them in the end. Like exactly they brought them into that They close. Oahu comes from behind, closes off their retreat, and the men are left to battle until they all die, except for those who left the account and were sent back to County Pools to report what happens. And so, but how do you imagine that now? Back in the day, you could, because they were there. Those mountains were there. The pool was there. You could picture it. How do we pass that legacy on to our children? How can they see it? When now they call it the Central Plains, as my wife says.
We used to be the Sand Hills.
Yeah.
On all the old maps, we're Sand Hills. Now we're the Central
Well,
Plains.
And I think that's one of the, I guess it's one of the shocking things about it is that, the sand of the Sand Hills has been mined over the years, in some ways flattening certain areas, although in this particular area it's not flat at all. This is the last remaining intact area of the dunes that hasn't been developed. But part of the strategy of denying that there's burials is by saying, oh, well, we don't know where the Battle of Kakanilua occurred. But it's like, well, actually we do. Because up until this dispute, there was no dispute about where the Battle of Kakanilua was. And now suddenly, because there's these last few areas that have never been developed, and probably for good reason, now all of a sudden they're denying that it took place there. And that became a central issue in this, was that first they take all the sand out of all the adjoining areas and say, well, you can't be sure that it was here. Or it wasn't here at all, and we'll never know where it was. And I mean, they've come up with every excuse to say that it didn't. They haven't denied yet that the battle actually happened, but they've gotten as close as you can.
I think, well, we do have some footage, right, about what you're talking about, because people who don't come from Maui or don't go to Maui often probably can't even imagine what you're talking about. And I did remember that Claire talked a bit about how much sand was removed. A lot still being removed. Is that correct?
Sand is not presently being mined, and the people who own Maui Lani Partners and Bill Mills Group is not actively taking sand from the dune, but
Because of a temporary injunction.
Right, but Hawaiian Cement, I think, has like 5 years of stockpile. So I think sand is still being removed from Maui, but it's already been pre-removed from the dunes themselves.
I see. I want to look a little bit at some of the footage so you can talk about what we're looking at, because I'm pretty sure most folks are like, in their heads, they think they can imagine it, and it looks sandy, because that's how I thought about it when I first heard it. Okay, so we're talking about like white sand. It doesn't look like that though, does it?
No.
Let's wait for
You'll
the...
see. One thing, Lynette, as he's loading, is one of the big differences is that in April, Gina Mangieri, Channel 2 News, did an investigative report. And because that story went out, I just happened to be in Honolulu when she was going to be interviewing, and so she interviewed me here. But because of her story, it was more widely known through the state, and the government, the county government, actually responded.
Right, because sand mining is an industrial use, and industrial uses are not allowed in a residential district, which is, this area is all zoned residential. So the question is, maybe it could get a conditional permit or a special use permit, but mining industry, you cannot get any kind of a special permit. It is not allowed absolutely in a residential district. So finally, at the end of April, the county did issue a warning. But that didn't, of course, stop them. The next day, they went out and had from 7 in the morning till 4 in the afternoon.
You'll see this
yeah,
in
you'll
the
see
clip.
it in the clip. Yeah, yeah.
So what I'm getting from that is government,
Aye.
development, economic concerns override the law or rules or Hawaiian concerns. That's basically what's happening, right? So you can't do this, but okay, well, we're just going to finish up this part. And okay, so that is not good.
Think you will run it?
And then until it's running, then go ahead.
Yeah, and it's funny because the county does it by email. They don't send an inspector with a notice of,
All right. But finish up your thought, and we can also be watching.
yeah, so, it's funny that they emailed them, I believe, on a Friday. And so my concern was when I looked at it, well, they don't have to look at it at all if they don't want to. It's really not an official notice.
And you've been away from your computer.
Yeah, you'd be, oh, sorry, we didn't get to see it. Why they did that? How many trucks did we?
So Lynette, does that look like sand to you?
No. What are we looking at here?
This is phase 9 of the Maui Lani development. This is the area that was in contention in our case. And this actually,
That does.
yeah, it was actually it was a pool. It was a pool when we first saw it. And then after this was done, they went down almost, I think we looked about almost 60 feet.
Oh, so there's a pool, and now there's what? Flat ground?
Now there's part of a pool, and the rest of it is flat.
In other areas, they've taken the pool completely down. People don't even remember that there used to be sand hills there because it's flat.
These areas are the different preservation sites. The new Maui Lani Safeway.
That's the Waiale Reservoir, right?
You see the Waiale Reservoir, and just on the other side of this is this area. That is actually a flood control plain where they're taking the sand out. So you can see that it is at the same level as this Waiale Reservoir. When you take it out, it will be lower than the reservoir.
So these are pictures of all the different areas that Maui Lani actually has developed. And has, some of them are already subdivisions with preservation sites inside. So yeah, this is all in that Maui Lani development. Not specifically phase 9, but are actually located.
These are all the areas around phase 9 where there's these massive burial concentrations, and they've been.
This is how they dispose of the burials.
And see, this signage, when OHA came to do the board meeting, I said I didn't appreciate it because with the wording of Native Hawaiian, according to the federal statutes, it claims them as American citizens. And I said, really, that should be changed because they weren't part of, and they died prior to the annexation. That these people still actually keep their status. But once you change that, you now can treat them as American citizens.
It's interesting.
You see the forest around it? That's what this looked like before they sand lined. This entire area looked like
It
that.
has Kiawe and the Haulikoa as cover, so you can't necessarily see it. It's not just like a pueone. You can't just. It's not like a sandbar. It's actually the sand is kept in place from blowing because of this vegetation. But yeah, so there's lithified sand, which is given the sand dune its structure and makes it unique.
Yeah. And this is the total of what was taken over several years.
In
There
terms
was a
of amount
document-
of sand?
Barges of
Barges and
sand.
barges.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, and that was done by Gina Mangieri of KHON too. Yeah.
So I'm going to ask, of course, the obvious question. Why is all this sand coming to Oahu?
According to her report, it was to assist on the use of the rail, the building of the rail system, as well as other construction things that happen on Oahu. Because again, the readily available sand makes it cheaper for construction companies to buy it from Maui than to actually ship it from China or from Canada.
Right, and there's there's a worldwide sand shortage for construction development. It's, if you Google sand shortage, you'll find, and it's been in every major news outlet, there's a worldwide shortage right now. And so sand on Maui has sort of been this easy way for certain preferred developments on Oahu to be able to get access to sand relatively cheaply and quickly. Like, for example, I think Gina took the trail. Where did the sand go from the barge on Oahu to where? And it went to the rail project. It went to certain high-rise developments in the core of Honolulu. So that's where the sand was going, and whatever was in the sand went with it.
And see, if you look at this scene, that, I think about a month later, disappeared. They started cutting all into that. And at the very top of this pool are burials. There's a couple of burials up here. Down below, there are burials. So in this small
Immediately
area,
after
they
Gina
found
went here,
5 to 6
posted her
burials. That's what they
investigative
account
report
for. So that's a
on
small
page
area to
1
have that
to
much,
April
to not
27,
consider it a burial site
2017.
and having that much,
Mayor Alan
EV
Arakawa
has
asked the
inadvertent
county council to
but
declare a moratorium
doesn't account for
on the export of
previous.
sand.
Yeah. So I want to say something about the inadvertent thing before I forget this. So,
April 29,
in the rules for Hawaiian burials,
Maui
there
Lobby
are
expedited the removal
burials
of
that are
sand
known, and then
and
anything that's
relocated
not
the
a
sand
known
to
burial
the
is considered to be an inadvertent discovery in the
disconnected
development
the fence
process.
Even though it's in a place
Yeah.
where lots of burials are.
Yes, and so with this particular project, this is the absurdity of it, and this is true also in Honolulu. So don't think that this is just a Maui thing.
Continue undermining
The archaeologists who are required to do an
cause
archaeological
eventual
survey or
collapse
inventory,
of the burials.
they can only dig so many trenches without
Where
getting
is the
a grading
cultural
permit.
advisor?
But you can't get a grading permit unless you have an
monitor.
archaeological monitoring plan, and you can't get an archaeological
Archaeologists.
monitoring plan unless you've done an archaeological survey. So basically,
state,
the county and the state
burial
have
council,
turned this
those
law
responsible
about archaeological
for the desecration
surveys
of
as a
our
weapon against itself.
will experience
So you can't do correct amount of archaeological work because you need a permit, but you can't do the permit unless you do the archaeological work. And so the net result is they have these qualified well, we didn't find anything, but that, I mean, it says, but that was to be expected because we could only do so many trenches over this particular area, so that basically every burial that's found in a graveyard suddenly is an inadvertent find under the law because an archaeological survey wasn't properly done. And so that's the first part of the problem. The second part of the problem is with this, as Connie Loa had just said, under the archaeological monitoring plan and the construction plans, they supposedly were to remove sand in 6-inch increments for the first 8 feet. And then after that, then they could just do whatever they wanted in terms of construction methods. The problem is that some of the burials are on the top of the dune, and then another one is like 40 feet down. Well, if you're only doing 6 inches on the top of everything, you can't account for the burial that was 40 feet down if you're just going hog wild with the excavator. And so that's another problem is, well, you don't have adequate archaeological surveying in the first place, and then once the permit is allowed, then it's like you just arbitrarily decide how many feet you have to take special precautions and you do whatever you want. And so in this case, there was a burial that was disturbed at it was 40 feet, right, Claire?
I believe so.
Yeah.
Oh, it was actually up more about 60 feet, and then they brought it down. They wanted to take the sand out, so they.
Oh, then it was 40 feet.
Then it was down at a lower elevation.
Well, according to the representative for ASH, which is the Archaeological Survey
Hawaii.
Hawaii, which is owned by Lisa Rutuno Hazuka, she was explaining the grading system. And so what they were doing, according to them, was that depending on the point, you could go down 30 feet. So if the point was lower, you still had 30 feet that you could go down. But to stabilize everything, according to the county code, you had to adjust everything else around it. So even though it's beyond the 30 feet or whatever the footage was, because the different plateaus of areas, you are allowed it, you would finagle, you know, taking, I'm only taking so much over here, but over here I'm taking maybe 60 feet. But that's okay, because I have to adjust to stabilize to be able to make the construction in the area. So, you know, and this person that was doing it actually supposedly did the archaeological inventory survey. We've come to the court case, found out that she's actually not a qualified archaeologist, even though she's been passing herself off as one. And she...
Yeah, well, let's be clear. Okay. She,
Sorry.
just say she is the owner, Elisa
right.
Rotuna Hazuka is the owner of Archaeological Surveys Hawaii. She is not the SHPD, the State Historic Preservation Division. She is not a SHPD qualified archaeologist because she does not have a master's degree in anthropology or archaeology. So actually, the qualified archaeologist for her firm is Jeffrey Pantaleo, who has his own archaeological firm on Oahu. And apparently, according to her sworn testimony, his relationship with her firm is that he spends a few hours every year reviewing reports that get filed.
Yeah, he's never attended. We've never seen him attend any of the meetings that actually need to be where you have to give your how can I say?
He's
description of
the
work.
principal
Right.
investigator, and he's supposed to do all the reporting, and he's never used. We've not seen him on Maui doing these reports.
And
which is interesting because if you're an attorney or you're an accountant, the owner of your business has to be an attorney or an accountant. There's no such thing as a law firm that's owned by somebody else, or an accounting firm that's owned by somebody else. And what is the reason for that? That is to ensure that the professional standards of the profession are being followed. But what we discovered in this instance is that there are archaeological firms that are doing a lot of work that is required by law to protect burial sites and other historic properties that are owned by people who are not qualified professionals, and that they hire qualified professionals to meet some kind of regulation, in this case, but they themselves are not professionals. And in this particular case, it turned out that the contractor and the developer were not following the archaeological monitoring plan that was already very weak to begin with. And the question is, would that have happened if there had actually been a professional involved? I mean, there's many instances where this whole process just fell apart. It was just a house of cards, and it all came tumbling down.
What can be done?
well, I guess from our point of view, I know Lance with the legal point, and we're so grateful to have him for all the time that he put out in energy and doing that. And I guess for our point, from what we need to do is bring awareness, and that's where we come in. And you know, that's feeding off of Claire, you know, Pana, and another friend, she doesn't want to be mentioned anymore, but who has worked tirelessly on history, on background. I mean, everything she brings up is factual. You can find it, she logs it down, and that's been disputed many times in the public forum. I mean, in the governmental forum, whether it be at Burial Council, whether it be at land use, or all these other meetings that are afforded us. Also, we have others that have joined us recently within the last, about the last 9 months, who have infused the awareness. And they caught fire, and the reason why we end up with Gina Mangieri's newscast is because one of the people that took up the awareness and got involved made, pushed, and along with everybody else, giving the information. So the thing is, everybody plays an intricate part. We have several people that have come on board, especially recently. As you can see, the video that was taken. Of course, again, the person doesn't want to be, wants to be anonymous.
But somebody else did that. Yeah.
So that, we have all these people, and they're not particularly Kanaka, but they have interests whether it be a moral interest, whether it be a connection for one of us, the children and their husband. She's not Kanaka, but her family is. We have others that actually heard the voice and came all the way from New York, left their practice there and came to New York from there and came home and is participating. We have, so that's been kind of building. We've been building a group stronger. We've had a group with Claire and myself and my wife and others that's been doing it for almost 10 years now. And Claire almost 12 years now. You know, so we've been slowly building a force of people that are willing to now get out there and to bring awareness. You know, not only in the Maui Lani, but there's recently another one in Wailuku, so by one of the bakeries. So, you know, we're trying to get awareness, and you know, we're lucky that Lance has heard the call too and has helped us in that area.
I think it's fair to say too that even though this is taking place on Maui, this is not by any
Absolutely.
means
Oh,
about
yeah.
Maui.
No.
This is a pervasive problem all over the place, and as you were talking about how in the interest of industry, rules get broken regularly, and it's kind of depressing to think that even though you're doing the right thing and you trust that others are doing the right thing, that's not happening. You're doing the right thing for ancestors, for the land, for the community, and there's somebody right behind you who's breaking every possible rule they can, and they're allowed to do that.
Right. Well, I think,
Absolutely.
you know, with SHPD, you know, one of the problems is that the state legislature has basically completely defunded DLNR. And in the priorities of DLNR, well, you have, you know, boating and fishing, all these things that actually generate some level of revenue. But historic preservation does not generate any revenue, and parks, unless they start charging people, generally don't generate revenue. And so the divisions of DLNR that don't generate any revenue get the shortest end of the stick when the legislature doesn't fund. So what you have is you don't have enough people. I think for a while, SHPD didn't even have a division chief, right? There was a long period during the Lingle administration where they just were not filling positions. And I think several of the borough councils didn't meet for a couple of years because she wasn't appointing anybody to the borough councils. And so the problem is if you don't have the staff, you don't have everything functioning the way that it's intended, in many instances, it's not necessarily that you have the staff members saying, oh, I want to destroy burials, but it's just much easier for them to say, oh, I'm going to agree that there's no burials here because that's one less thing. Like where it's easy for me to deny that there's burials, it's easier for me to just do that than to really insist that everything be as thorough as possible because we just don't have the labor power in the office to go through all of that stuff. And so that's a big problem, is that, you know, we have a state historic preservation division and it's not being funded. And so the people who are there don't want to add any additional work to what they're doing. And so there's all of these, I don't know, I don't think anybody's doing anything intentionally, maybe a few of them are, but most of them it's just easily captured by industry because they just don't have the resources or the labor to do the job that is required by law and I think morally required of them.
That's also a strategy. That's a government strategy to defund or unfund. And then all the things that need to be in place in order for land to be protected, that's not going to happen.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because Downer, who is now the director of SHPD, he in a meeting on Maui, they were asked to come. Shifty was asked to come to testify on this Maui Lani project and the permitting process, and so he comes along with Hinana Rodriguez, and then also he's a new archaeologist for the Maui office. His name is Matthew Barker Ferris. So they came to testify, and Mr. Downer basically what was related by Lance. They say we don't have the funds, we don't have the staffing, and because it's too involved of an investigation, we can't do it. And so he says basically when the permits come from the county, they sign it off without any investigation being done. and send it back because Don Guzman, who's the council representative for Kahului, said, so you're telling us that you just sign it and send it back? And he goes, yes. And he states because of those facts, no staffing, no money, not able to do all these things. And
right. So when the people, so when people can get together and actually try to enforce the law themselves, this is what happened in their case. They were able to find an attorney who would take it pro bono, and then we filed a motion for a preliminary injunction, and at the hearing, which was expedited because Judge Cardozo granted a 10-day stay when we filed we asked for an immediate stop, and then he granted it, and so because of that, we had to have a hearing within 10 days. At that hearing, the developers, the landowners, attorney asked for an evidentiary hearing, which spanned over 6 weeks. And it was at the end of that Judge Cardozo granted a preliminary injunction, that he said that it was clear that the archaeological monitoring plan, which was very weak, and we didn't get in the hearing, we didn't get into the weakness of it. That was the baseline was the archaeological monitoring plan. And he found that not necessarily intentionally or maliciously, but the contractor and the developer did not comply with the minimum requirements of it. And so he ordered an injunction stopping any further excavating or removing of sand or ground disturbing. And then there's a whole list of conditions that they have to do in order to be able to move forward. But of course, in the meantime, the county's told them to stop, period. For violating the zoning laws. So they're in this, at this moment, phase 9 is sort of in a temporary freeze of everything. How long that will last, we don't know. But, for them, it's not that this was free. So we have a 6-week evidentiary hearing, and then we're supposed to, provide proposed findings of fact. Well, 6 weeks of hearing transcripts are not free. It's a cost that no individual, unless they're privately, independently wealthy, could potentially afford. So in this case, it just happened that things worked out in a way where we could litigate it to the point where we have it at a freeze. But this really should not be the obligation of individuals. Individuals should not, even if it's a community group like Malama Kakanilua, should not be in the position of having to enforce the entire structure of burial protection and historic preservation laws. If you look at in a broader level, it's absurd that they've had to do all of this. This is the job. We were doing the job of the Attorney General and the State Historic Preservation Division.
You have a funding plan?
Yes.
What does it look like?
We have a GoFundMe site. We're doing a community-based fundraiser on November 4th. Connie can tell us about the GoFundMe site, the name of it, so that you can find it.
Just in case people are interested,
Yes.
maybe.
Yeah, it's actually on the Malama Kakanilua. You can go to that site and to the GoFundMe and find it there. And it's done by one of our friends, one of our volunteers.
So
so-
GoFundMe Malama Kakanilua.
Yeah.
I just want to say, I want to answer your question, what can we do? And I want to say that, like Lance says, we're kind of doing the job that should be done by the county, that should be done by SHPD. We shouldn't have to take something to court to have somebody follow the laws that are already
You
there.
would think.
You would think. And so I would say, first, we get in touch with our kupuna, with Keakua, and see that this can actually change. For me, when we were granted the temporary injunction, that told me things can change. We can actually, together, collectively, bring forth the change that is needed so that we can actually do something to preserve our iwi kupuna. We don't need to go to Germany to save them and preserve them. We're right here on Maui. They're still in the place that they are, but will they be if we're allowed to let HC&D, Amaron, take sand out of our Maui sand dunes? Will that happen? I don't think so. What we can do is we can hold firmly that thought, you can help us to continue this effort by contributing to the fundraising that we're doing so that we can continue the legal fight that really we should not be doing, but we're going to do it, because if we don't do it, nobody will. And you can help us with that. Yeah.
And I think too, you know, like the shirt that Lynette is wearing, you probably can see it better on her body than mine. But
It's beautiful.
it talks about, you know,
Yeah.
we talk about the ano. The ano is the essence, especially when we go back to the story about Kakanilua and them leaving the fallen soldiers or warriors on the sand. And my plea to the governing bodies is that, how do you separate the sand from the man? Where does a man end and the sand begin? Because like the old adage, ashes, ashes, dust to dust. That's what happened to these men.
I want to add something before we run out of time.
Yeah.
And that has to do with something that you shared before we came on. These kupuna are helping.
Absolutely.
And how we know they're helping is that they got taken to Oahu, right? And you mentioned the fact that they are probably in the rail system. What's going on with the rail?
Okay, just to let you all know that there's been reports from the west side of Oahu that the pillars of concrete for the rail are cracking. And I'm not surprised at all. And we have numerous reports of iwi kupuna and interactions that are not of the paranormal type, and we're not surprised by the way that they're being treated, that the iwi that has already been preserved is being treated in certain areas. And we have many, many stories, and look forward to the video that's going to come out to talk about the people who have been in construction, have been in different places, and have suffered the effects of a paranormal, spiritual side, and what has happened to some of their family members. Look forward to our video that's going to be coming out.
Sounds awesome. I want to thank you, Claire. Happy to see you again after all these years,
good.
Lance.
Yeah.
And Kaniloa, I mean, I learned a lot. See, I always think I know what I know, right? And then people come in and they tell me stuff and I'm like, really? Okay, so, and then thank you also, all you folks out there that are watching us. Again, this is Issues That Matter. Wonderful panel. I'm Lynette Cruz. Come and join us again at any time. You can watch this also on Olelo.net, I think. Thank you.